Hello and welcome to this episode of the P&E podcast. My name is Jack Jacob and I am your host. In this episode, I'm joined by Jonny Wathen, who's the CIO at Wellspring Academy Trust, which is a large multi-academy trust based in the north of England. Jonny and I talk through his journey from starting his career as a quantity surveyor apprentice through to working for the NHS to his current role as the CIO for a large academy trust. Jonny describes how his varied career path, and that consists of working in further education, providing summer camps and sports coaching for primary age children, and to being a curriculum leader in a secondary school, have really given him different perspectives which aid him in his role today. We discuss how he believes a background in physical education shapes school leaders, and how Jonny's passion for transformation in education drives his decision making and leadership style today. Please do enjoy this episode as we get to know the person behind the job title. Hi everyone, before we get into this conversation, just want to give a shout out to the episode sponsor, Guide Teacher Development. Guide Teacher Development provides accredited training courses, CPD and other best practice expertise to hundreds of schools across the UK. What's different about Guide Teacher training, and rather timely given the current global situation, is that 100% of the training they deliver is delivered online and has been since 2017. Their revolutionary online platform, designed by an Ofsted outstanding former head teacher, can help every single member of a school staff to develop their career. All training content is available in one place at any time and accessible anywhere on any device. Guide Teacher Development provides fully accredited, expert training that is effective, engaging and evidenced. It dramatically reduces the cost of face-to-face training programs whilst being easier for staff to complete in their own time, yet still trackable by school senior leadership teams. To find out more, please visit www.guideteachertraining.com. Right, so let's talk about a bit about you growing up and so on. So, first of all, you work in an academic environment now. You're the CIO for a multi-academy trust. Were you academic growing up?
Yeah, good question, I guess. I'd say that I kind of was always kind of interested in school and really found sort of subjects challenging, but I wouldn't have called myself an academic. And
Right.
I think in terms of grades and exams and all that we kind of go through, I always did okay. Never sort of top of the class, and never sort of really struggling. So I enjoyed applied learning, I guess, and so being able to understand the theory behind things, but also then to keep asking the question of, well, why is that, and learn through doing, was always kind of my best approach to education.
Yeah, makes sense. So where did you grow up then? Talk to me about your childhood.
So I grew up in Leeds,
Yeah.
and Leeds born and bred, as you probably gathered from the accent.
I'm awful at accents.
And really kind of retained in the area. So studied obviously primary, secondary education in South Leeds area, and then went to what they called at the time a partnership provision, which offered a range of A-levels and other subjects in an area called Rothwell.
Okay, yeah.
So that was kind of a unique experience because you got to interact with peer groups from other local schools in like a collegiate environment, but not quite going to college.
Yeah.
And so
what's that school called? Is it right near Alton Hall, the hotel?
There is one of the schools that was part of the partnership there. So that was, I went to a school called Redillion.
Right.
The school that you're referring to is possibly Royd's school.
Royd's, that's it. Royd's. Yeah.
So yeah, near Alton Hall, you know the area.
Because we run events at Alton Hall, so we use that as our northern venue. So yeah, it's obviously very well. It's the area where you went to school and grew up then.
Yeah, so I'm probably about 5 or 10 minutes from Alton Hall where I live. And yeah, and there was a local, really small further education college as well as part of that partnership, which gave it a little bit of a little bit more diversity than a traditional sixth form. And so I kind of got to that stage of my journey, and you get through that kind of year 9, choosing your options and doing your GCSEs, and you get to make those choices at A level, post 16. And I didn't really know what subjects to choose, because I kind of, I enjoyed certain subjects, as most people do, and I liked physical education and PE, and was a keen sports person. But I also enjoyed computers and technology, and I also enjoyed understanding, probably with the PE link, anatomy, physiology, and the biology aspects of it. So I ended up having a real mix of A levels that didn't quite lead to any specific path, other than, well, I enjoyed those subjects, so let's give it a go and see how I fared. Deep down, and maybe subconsciously, whenever you got the opportunity to do things like work placements, I always ended up back in the school environment. So maybe that's where I felt at ease and at home, and that obviously probably inspired my next step, which was to go to Leeds Met University, which is now Leeds Beckett's, and study physical education as a subject. And by that time, I'd had every intention of becoming probably a secondary school PE teacher. That was kind of the route I saw myself heading into. And yeah, sort of completed that study after a few years at Leeds Beckett's. Whilst I was studying, I went through a range of jobs just to kind of get not only some income, but to get some perspective into different industries. So I've got a range of jobs. One of which, actually, taking it back to my pre-post 16, I even considered taking up an apprenticeship in quantity surveying, just because a lot of my family was in construction industries, and I was told that was quite a good trade to have.
Quite a good earner.
Yeah, good earner. I did it for around sort of maybe 3 months, and thought this isn't really for me. So I took up my offer at university then. And then throughout my studies, did a lot of work, including worked for the NHS, and sort of on the at the time it was called NHS Direct, and it's now the 111 service. So there's a synergy there between the kind of healthcare aspect of what I've picked up through experiential learning, and kind of the role that I found myself in today. So on kind of graduating, I then got to a point of, well, what do I do now? And my first job in the line of work that I saw myself entering into was actually as a tutor at Wakefield College. So Wakefield being a further education college, delivering A-level PE at the time, and further education.
Do you have to do a PGCE and stuff like that to do that?
Yeah, so my kind of my route into PGCE. So when I finished my degree, I was looking at options, and one of those options was to go do a secondary PGCE at Leeds Met University, and there was quite a lot of competition for those places. I think they took on 20 places per year. I think it was in excess of 200 people on the course I did, in addition to similar courses like sports science and the rest of it, plus the external applicants. So really, really competitive. And I wasn't able to secure a place on that PGCE at that university. But my other option was to do an in-service PGCE, which meant studying whilst working, and I did that through Wakefield College. That's where I commenced my studies and did it over 2 years. So it was almost like evening tuition. It qualified you at the time to work in the post-14 sector. So you could work with secondary age pupils right through to adults. And it was over 2 years, as I said. So the second year of it, I actually secured a permanent contract at another college, which coincidentally was Joseph Priestley College at the time, and that was one of the colleges in the partnership that I described to you earlier. So a real kind of homecoming.
You kept it all local.
Yeah, keeping local and kind of giving back to the community really in that respect. But that job was where I diversified yet again into delivering what they called public service provision, and that was certainly something I could draw upon from my time working in the NHS. And also I delivered on some of the sport provision within that role. So I was able to deliver PE, fitness, and so on. So that kind of was when I kind of really decided upon, I enjoy working in the further education sector. And that was an area where opportunities are endless because, no 2 years are the same. There's always change, whether that's driven through government policy initiatives or whether that's through the need for reorganisations within those settings.
Yeah.
And very quickly I was able to progress from being a frontline teacher or lecturer, as they were referred to in those settings, to a curriculum manager and managing a very diverse portfolio of provision. Joseph Priestley College was at the time the third smallest college in the country. So you can imagine, in order to have a broad curriculum offer, with a relatively small workforce, I got given the opportunity to manage a range of things beyond areas that I was a subject specialist in.
Sure.
So I picked up responsibility for, in addition to sport and public services, construction, which had carpentry and joinery, painting and decorating, as well as IT. And and when I kind of think back now, there were all things I could relate to. So even though I may not have been the subject specialist in those areas, I was very passionate about making it the best possible provision for the communities that we served. And I spent a few years at the college developing those curriculum areas, and experienced then a really big transition, which was to merge as part of a merger with, at the time, it was referred to as Leeds City College, which is now Illuminate Group as part of a broader educational offering. And Leeds City College was an amalgamation of a number of colleges across the Leeds City region that had previously kind of come together probably 12 or 18 months prior to our merger. But at that time, it meant working with the college in order to transition my departmental portfolio into the larger structures of that organisation. So quite a daunting prospect, almost handing over.
And how old was you at this time?
I was probably, I took up that post around 24, so we're probably talking 26, 27 as a young manager, fulfilling what was the right thing to do at the time in terms of economies of scale, and I just had to kind of trust in the organisation and demonstrate how I could, work with that transition and add value. So it was daunting, it was scary, but it was at the time, the right thing to do, because funding didn't permit lots of small organisations to sustain in that.
Sure.
So in successfully transitioning within into Leeds City College at the time, my role became almost effectively redundant and non-existent. But because I'd approached it in a proactive way, the management were keen to support me into a role that was more focused on developing partnerships. And so for at least a couple of years, I spent time working for the college, working as an outreach to other schools, and got some really fantastic opportunities, such as working with a local school, I think it was Coburn Secondary School, to set up their A-level centre, which was really a really good opportunity to be involved in.
So when you say the partnerships, was it partnering with the local schools around the area? And
absolutely, yeah. So it was working with, they had a team that dealt with what we called school links provision, and so you had your individual departments within the college, and then you had the partnerships team, which reached out into schools. And in a sense, it was providing alternative provision for those schools to access. And it was also about supporting transition. So where pupils finish year 11 and were looking to progress into college, it was making them aware of our fantastic offer that was available, and making that process and that transition as seamless as possible. And given, I guess, my experience today, that really resonated with me, because I was keen to ensure that if you're not successful in whatever your first aim is, in my case it was to become a secondary school PE teacher, there are alternative paths, and so I kind of then diversified into FE sector, because that was the opportunity that was available to reach the same endpoint. And so having worked in that partnerships team, I was able to interface with colleagues across all the departments, and again the portfolio that I previously managed gave me some common ground to build those relationships, and it also allowed me to work with schools in a non threatening way, because naturally the schools had their own sixth forms and wanted to retain those pupils, and it was about making sure that the offer was right for them.
So was it about basically people that might not necessarily like the curriculum that was on offer within their own sixth forms? Here's an alternative, and we've got X, Y, and Z courses that you don't offer, that whether it be construction courses or whatever it might be, that perhaps less academic students that want to stay in education, but going down a different route. So that was the type of setup, was it?
Absolutely, yeah. So it was referred to as a vocational offer, or an alternative offer.
Yeah.
And that included, we took some young people from the age of sort of 14 to 16, which was those
the naughty kids.
Well, often referred to at the time,
I was one of them,
by schools as the naughty kids, and so we recognised that actually it was more about the suitability of the environment that they were in. And the fact that engagement in maybe a traditional or academic sense of the matter, a subject was not right for them, and therefore they did need to be involved in a more varied curriculum offer. So some young people, that was entering construction trades. For others, it was entering the more IT and digital industries. For others, it was the public services. Many of them had aspirations to become military or the police service. And so what are the skills requisite to get into those sectors is very much interpersonal skill development. It's not academic qualifications. And so there was a lot of interest, and we had a really strong offer that was available across the city, working with several hundred students in that department. So I guess the next step for me was then, that was more.
Well, break it down a step before we go on to too far in your career. I just want to start. I want to pick apart some of the stuff that you've mentioned. So you kind of dream job growing up was PE teacher. So I assume you're a sporty person, yeah.
Yeah, and enjoyed all sports.
Really. Any particular favourites?
Played an awful lot of football and rugby league, but athletics.
Rugby league is such a northern sport, isn't it?
You could say that.
Yeah. See, I don't even know where my local rugby. I know where my local rugby union club is. I've got one literally about half a mile left and one about a mile right in my local area. I've got St Francis and Crawley Town. But yeah, rugby league. I don't even know where there probably is one local, but I wouldn't even know where it is. But yes, it seems to be a northern sport anyway.
It's it's really interesting because the high school that I went to was formerly I think it was formerly a grammar school many moons prior to me attending, and so it was.
Why would you not have attended it if it was a grammar school?
Well, that's the question. Probably not. But the that wasn't a decision. But what was a decision was what sports to engage in at the school.
Yeah.
And the head of PE at the time, who I have to say was really an inspiration in one respect. Certain gentleman called Mr. Jones. He was from Wales.
Yeah.
And he was an avid rugby union fan and player, and therefore that was the sport of choice in that setting. And what was really interesting is that our year group in particular had some real high-profile names, many of which actually went on to play professional rugby league, for the likes of Leeds Rhinos and Cats Bradford Bulls at the time. And there was almost a boycott of sport because they took rugby league. Well, it wasn't on offer, and so the negotiation that took place between the year group and the head of the year at the time was, well, we'll play rugby union as long as we can play rugby league as well. And so I think they call that now pupil voice or learner voice.
Right.
It was learner voice in action, because there was a real passion for that. And I think the reason for that, in particular around rugby league and northern towns, is that sense of community. There's a real strong following. And the area that I live in surrounding areas, there's still that sense of community and belonging.
Yeah, you definitely get that with the northern clubs. Is that it's almost a club per city, isn't it? You've got, say, Sheffield, it's got its own club. Leeds, I'm talking about football or whatever sport it is, but let's say football, the sport that I know. Sunderland, Newcastle, Manchester's got Salford United and City, to be fair. Liverpool's got Liverpool and Everton, but it's not like London where you've got West Ham, Tottenham, Arsenal, Chelsea, QPR. Then you've got a few on the outskirts, Brentford, Watford, etc., etc. So there definitely seems to be more that, it's that kind of coming together of an entire town or city on a Saturday afternoon to watch the team. And I suppose that's the same for rugby league or rugby union or in fact whatever sport it is. Yeah,
and I think that also was part of the passion for me around the subject of physical education, because I've come up many times with does that mean you go out and play football every day? As a PE teacher or all the usual jibes around it, but
you're not a real teacher. You're a PE teacher.
Precisely, but when you actually break it down as a subject, it's so interdisciplinary in terms of the component parts of the subject matter. For example, you can look into the history of physical education and the evolution of sports from prize fighting in the Middle Ages right through to professional boxing in today's society, and it's just it's one of the only subjects where you can actually go very diverse and quite broad. And I think that's why I liked it, because I get bored of focusing on one thing, as you probably gathered, and so I really did enjoy that subject.
But did you play a sport at any particular level growing up?
Not at a professional level. Obviously played at amateur level,
like a local team level kind of thing.
Football and rugby. But again, I've done athletics as well, and used to enjoy sort of throwing and jumping activities. High jump and javelin in particular, but never at a professional standard.
Yeah, makes sense. So who do you support then, football wise?
Do you need to ask that question? given what I've said, it's got to be Leeds United, and it's fingers crossed. This could
you going back up to the Prem?
I hope so.
You've got one hell of a manager. You got one hell of a manager at the minute.
Yeah, it takes all sorts really, and he's doing a grand job, and I just hope they have done an awful lot of work over the past few years to get into the position where they are now.
Yeah, well, Spygate, of course, they got a lot of work behind the scenes.
Yeah, using all the strategies in the old book. But the good thing is, I hope that they actually achieve it through merit. It'd be really disappointing if we found ourselves where the season was cancelled and they had to be promoted 75% of the season completed, because we'd never hear the end of it.
It's like Liverpool, isn't it? They've waited so long to win the league. They're clearly going to win it, and I reckon it'll get to a point where the Prem play. It wouldn't surprise me if the Prem played a handful of games, so then they won it mathematically and went, all right, well, we'll get on the next season now. But you're the lead of the longest serving championship club, aren't they?
That's a fact that you may be more.
I think they are.
Yeah, it's in time. They've been down there.
You've never gone down. You've never gone back up, have you?
I believe we went down.
Did you?
Yeah, I think we went down. Yeah, to League One and then back up again. But they've been down there far too long for my liking. They are a big city club, and therefore, not that it's ever God-given right, but they should certainly be competing at the highest level. And as I say, the performances on merit have gotten where they are now in the table, and I hope that by hook or by crook they get promoted. But I'd like it to be done, as you said, with Liverpool mathematically, so that it.
Makes sense.
Right.
So did you ever get to secondary school PE teacher?
So I didn't work in a secondary school as a PE teacher by any particular role that I held. I guess the closest I came to it was delivering sport and PE to secondary school pupils in a college setting.
Right.
So I guess it's one of the same in some respects, and I always enjoyed teaching A-level PE. Again, it was in a college setting, but that would have been the same in a post-16 sixth form. So I probably came as close to becoming what I aspired to be originally as possible at the time. Before then, I was setting a course or trajectory to progress into educational management, and that became the kind of next focus and goal.
Yeah.
At that time, when I mentioned previously that I took up the curriculum manager's post, I had actually set up my own business as well, and so I was doing a lot of sports coaching, summer camps, and that gave me a real insight into the primary sector. And so I run a successful offering within the locality through what was at the time called the School Sports Partnership, and that was meeting need and demand over the half-term breaks, over the summer breaks, before school, after school, lunchtime. But then it came down to what was going to give, because I took on this new curriculum management role, and I took on more and more contracts from a business perspective. And at the time, still relatively young, I was looking to secure a mortgage and all the rest of it. And at the time,
you can't do it all, can you?
The safer option for me was to take the permanent employment at that time.
Yeah, makes sense. So how do you then become from a PE teacher to a curriculum manager? I know there's other steps in between, but then to be someone leading IT and digital within an organization, because I think typically you'd expect someone of that job title that they've gone to I don't know, college or university, done a sports science, a computer science type degree, or they've gone an apprenticeship and they've been a network analyst and they've worked their way up, or come from a coding background and then got into management and leadership and so on. So talk to me about kind of IT for you then, and how you become the leader within your organization, a chief information officer, not too long after, or within 10 years of
It's a really good question, actually, and I sometimes have to remind myself of kind of that journey. But that's the really interesting bit for me, is that overarching is that when you get to the level of executive officer within an organisation, irrespective of title,
Yeah.
it is about leadership, and it is
Yeah.
about leadership in the broadest sense. And one of the things that I don't know if this is actually a fact or just an observation, but many school-based leaders and leaders of education organisations, a large proportion of them do have a background in sport, or an interest in sport, and a background in, say, physical education as a degree subject. Be interesting to actually do some research into the numbers there.
Do you think that's because, for me, when I grew up in school, the PE teachers or the people that taught those subjects were perhaps more on your level, and you trusted them more, and you could engage with them more. And, I remember there was a teacher called Mr. Easlick, who was a PE teacher, but also head of house, and dealt with behavioural problems. Obviously, he had a lot of dealing with me. I think do you think there's a correlation because of the communication skills and perhaps the trust that students have with those types of people is naturally going to be more strong than, say, a maths teacher?
I think you're right. I think it comes back to my earlier point, which was the interpersonal skill development. So some of the subjects that you learn and you can undertake whilst studying, physical education as a subject. I was really keen to be involved in outdoor activities, and I think when I reflect on that, maybe the reason is because it pushes you outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
It forces you to work as a member of a team. It requires you to be able to effectively communicate, overcome adversity, and in a lot of the experiences I had, I really thrived in that space. I really enjoyed the challenge and the need to be part of something that was going to overcome that adversity or that challenge. And so that was my kind of choice. I guess back to your initial question, I progressed from my partnership management role, and it was quite, pertinent to kind of my journey, to take up a head of school role within a college, which at this time was Sheffield College.
Yeah. Well, so was a head of school role, just for me?
So it was a role that effectively it's whether you call it head of academy or head of an area within.
Not like a head teacher then.
For those working in a school-based industry, it probably can be as close to being a head teacher as possible. But the key difference for me was that in a college, there is a lot more emphasis on student and pupil recruitment, retention, ensuring that the skills that are being developed support progression into employment.
Okay.
Whereas in school, the focus traditionally has always been one of academic standards, and therefore, the work towards a point of getting exams and results has been the
key driver. Yeah.
Key driver. Yeah. Whereas in college, it is more about the economic contribution. Post pupil comes onto a course, they study floristry. What's their ambition and how are they going to then thrive and forge a career in that area.
Makes sense.
So so taking on that role was for me a step up from being a curriculum manager to being more focused around business development and looking at growth strategies, looking at quality assurance systems, and my passion for educational technology really kind of came into its own in that space. And coincidentally, I was just looking through some of the an old blog post, I think it was, and I got involved at the time back in 2015 now, so 5 years ago, an online, it's called a MOOC, a massive open online course, which was funded, I think, by the E05 initiative, and it was curated by University of Leeds, and Sheffield College was one of the partners that was involved in that course at the time, called Blended Learning Essentials. And sort of one of my passions was to ensure that wherever possible and appropriate, we were able to use technology to enhance learning opportunities.
Yep.
And so I've been a real big advocate of Google technologies in particular, now known as G Suite for Education, formerly as Google Apps for Education,
Okay.
and the use of, in particular, Google Classroom to deliver a blended learning and remote learning experience.
Yeah.
That was the case when I was a teacher, and it was the case at every stage through being a manager. And that's the kind of tenuous link, really, that sort of abridged my interaction with the back office or support departments within the college. So because I was quite passionate about technology and IT, I then forged very good working relationships with those respective teams. So I was very much a part of the furniture within the IT support team, and similarly within the management information teams. Often curriculum departments kind of stay within their respective silos. And that's one of the biggest barriers to.
Do you get any raised eyebrows? What you doing over here?
Yeah, and if nothing else, it was for a coffee, a biscuit, and a catch up. But actually, when I think back to why I did it, it was about building relationships, building rapport, and building that sense of teamness in order to get things done in the most efficient and effective way.
Sure.
And so I spent an awful lot of time, with every business support department, understanding what they did and how they were able to support me and my teams and my departments, and how we could support them achieve their, whether it's compliance or regulation. And I think through that kind of phase of my development, I think it was noticed by leaders at the time. So I remember the principal at one point invited me to get involved in what they referred to as strategic initiatives and development programs. And initially, as a contributor to those programs, it was, Jonny's got some good ideas or some opinion. He's always got an opinion about something, involve him. But then, as I progressed in my role, it became to be apparent that actually the principal requested that I chaired some of those project groups on the basis that it would be a curriculum-led solution, as opposed to it being driven by the mechanics and the machine of support centre bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And I say that in the politest sense, because if you took everything by the letter, i.e., what are the requirements placed upon finance teams, what are the requirements placed upon IT teams, there are so many policy and regulatory requirements. It almost hamstrings you from doing the best thing for the core business, which is delivering high quality education. And just as a flippant example, there was always this trade-off between IT. One curriculum head would ask for Max to deliver a digital media curriculum and gaming course, to be met by a response which was similar to, well, we don't support Max because we don't have the skills in this team, so therefore you're going to have to use, Dell PCs. Well, that's not industry standard, that's not industry specification, but that's what you're telling me I can have. And actually, there was no appreciation that was inhibiting the growth of that particular area. So one principal saw through that and sort of gave me a brief to say, challenge the status quo, ask why, be relentless around doing the right thing, and do it in a way that was hopefully charismatic and supportive.
So not argumentative, not trying to play a devil's advocate for the sake of it, and so on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, some days I probably got that right, and other days I probably was way off the mark. But the one thing I was absolutely committed to and passionate about was doing what I believed to be the right thing. And so that was kind of my transition from focusing purely on the things I could directly control, such as the curriculum and the educational opportunity, and all the annualized stuff of Ofsted inspections. But by the age of 30, I think I'd been through 8 or 9 Ofsted inspections across 4 different organisations, ranging from grade 4 inadequate situations and rapid improvement right through to outstanding provision. And so I was looking for something new, and I think that then
sounds a little bit like a transformational kind of role, like what would be described as like, I don't know, a digital transformation manager or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. So that was kind of I was kind of then wheeled out or involved or invited to join in absolutely anything and everything that would add value. And I think that the reason for that is there a better way of doing this? What's the user experience like, and how can we ensure that we're working as efficiently and as effectively as possible?
Yeah. How can we use the tech as the enabler?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that was a driver for me, because, well, I absolutely love technology, absolutely in my comfort zone working in an educational sphere, and keen to progress in a leadership capacity. How do I, what's the next step? And so I was kind of keeping a close eye on the academy's agenda, because I had at different stages, when I'd been looking for opportunities, considered transitioning into what was previously the schools sector, and it wasn't anything that was you would have thought it was quite easy to achieve, but there was massive there was a lot of traditional thinking.
Well, the thing that I think from an outsider's perspective, if it was on a school by school basis, I remember on a school by school basis when I was in school, it was the IT team or what's probably now seen as like the digital and infrastructure and so on. It was literally just IT support, and if your computer went down, that was it. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. People back then probably didn't appreciate the impact that technology would have on the student experience, or even actually the experience of the teachers and the support staff and everyone involved in running these organizations. And 2, the budgets. They couldn't pay for say a CIO, for example, or even like a head of IT, or and I appreciate in organizations a CIO might be the head of IT or whatever, but yeah, so for a few reasons I just don't think that would have been possible outside of a mat.
Yeah, but I think prior to me kind of getting to that realization of looking for that sort of role, I was obviously formerly a teacher, and there was real traditional views on you go do your secondary PGCE and you come with QTS, and you then get a job and you work your way up, and you do a number of years doing this, that, and the other. I found that the school sector was quite traditional, and so when the MAT agenda was gaining momentum and growing, I thought now the time is right to really take what I've learned and try to affect it in what is a new world for schools as a sector. So that was when I saw the role at Wellspring, and that role was originally based on the need to create the infrastructure and the systems to share information. The chief exec had a real clear view that he wanted to ensure, as we grew at scale, that information could freely flow between the constituent parts.
Yeah.
But as you rightly said a moment ago, the infrastructure, the technology, the legacy arrangements just didn't necessarily make that an easy job. And so there was a lot of manual handling, erroneous data, legacy systems that were in some cases antiquated and were in need of complete removal, as opposed to being able to evolve and keep up with the pace of technology.
Yeah.
So the value that I could bring was almost to that role was almost twofold. One, how do we do that? And two, from a different sector that has had to really survive on a shoestring, and innovate and be creative and come up with efficient, effective ways of working. How can I bring what I've experienced to a sector that is better funded in terms of the academy's agenda compared with the FE sector, and in a state of maturity that would really benefit from that. So it was some quite visionary leadership from the chief exec of Wellspring to see that and give me that opportunity based on what I could bring.
Definitely.
So
what was the job title of that first role then?
So it was as a CIO
okay.
for the trust, but the role itself was focused a lot around the information systems and on your traditional school-based operations, such as registry or data returns, and then one of the real timely drivers for me was around GDPR, and that became a real neutral ground because it was an area that people didn't feel comfortable and confident with. I had certainly experience of data protection from some of my studies and from the roles that I'd held. At the time, maybe wasn't an absolute expert in that field, but it was something that aligned very closely to the business need, and therefore, with further training and development, was able to really own that space. And so my first 6 months at the trust as a CIO was actually spent preparing for GDPR,
right?
But in a way that was not a policing, a GDPR policing approach. It was very much around this new regulation is coming in. It's an evolution of the former Data Protection Act and principles, and we need to be raising awareness of this because it ain't going to go away. It's only going to get more and more, focused around privacy and individual rights and freedoms. And how can we use that as a driver to achieve some of the other ambitions, which were data integrity, data standardization, information sharing and flow, and as you touched on, it become more of a transformational role than anything IT support.
Of course. Makes sense, and it's about how you can kind of use that challenge or that issue to then find better ways of working elsewhere, and it all kind of that being the driver for it. So when you got the role, was GDPR a thing, or was it like literally as you kind of signed the contract, boom, this thing popped up, or was it always part of the kind of initial brief of the role?
It was part of the initial brief of the role. The preparations for GDPR coming in, I think, were at least a couple of years in the making. However, like many things, regulations evolve and change, and unless you've got somebody who's going to concern themselves with that particular thing, beyond the live activities. So, for example, freedom of information has been a thing for some time. They were just matters that were dealt with by, say, the governance team. And so a person like me joining the organisation was able to then start to provide additional support or reshape how those processes would work as a trust, because the key difference in a lot of these projects and initiatives is that the trust is the legal entity, and they have to ensure risk is managed in a way that is palatable. To assure the trustees and the board of directors and the executive team that the
almost like a risk mitigation exercise as well as transformation. So that's kind of back end stuff and getting those kind of data flows right and so on. Has the role evolved, or when did it evolve? It has, into kind of how tech can be used to better the student experience, or better the learning journey, or better outcomes for teachers and the way that they deliver learning. So has that happened, or is that something that's on the horizon?
So the role itself has been purely focused on the support centre and the trust, making sure that our organisation can function. So there's been limited opportunity to really directly involve the learning experience as I would have done in a previous role where I was more curriculum focused. That said, I had in former roles introduced technologies such as G Suite for Education, or been part of the team that introduced that, certainly at Joseph Priestley College, at Leeds City College, at Sheffield College, and I found that really easy from a teacher perspective to take teachers with me on that journey, because the minute you show them the tools and the technology, they're like, that's, why didn't somebody show me this 10 years ago? It's so intuitive and so beneficial to both the staff and the pupil experience that it's a no-brainer. My new challenge was then starting that same journey from the support centre perspective and taking leaders, managers, and other office functions on that journey with me. And so that's where I started out with this initiative, and we decided to progress with some of the Google technologies around our digital infrastructure. So we introduced 7 digital hubs, which were kitted out with the Google Meet video conferencing technologies, as I shared at the recent Partnership Network event. And we strategically located them across the regions in order to say, irrespective of what's going on in your school, because not every school could afford to kit out a room with that technology, we will guarantee you access to those hubs in order to access trust-wide meetings, in order to support sharing best practice for teaching and learning. Whatever you want to use them for, the infrastructure is there. It's reliable. It's cutting edge in many respects, and that got some real good buy-in from the back office and from the leaders. When those individuals started to see the real power and the benefits of that, some leaders in their schools said, do you know what, I really want to start to now explore the use of Google Classroom and, more recently, Chromebooks as a pupil device. And that's where I've been able to start to broker conversations now around technology enhanced learning and the more pedagogically focused student experience. Now, I've got to be mindful that my role is very distinct. It's not a curriculum focused role, but I can add tremendous value to those conversations. So part of the CIO brief, as it's evolved, has to take a lead on running a portfolio of functions or business units that not only reflects my areas of expertise and interest, but actually complements and helps the organisation to continuously improve. So I refer to the areas that I look after now as commercial, digital, and performance.
Okay.
Commercial element includes some of our traded service offerings. So from a CIO perspective, I'm very keen to look at the analytics around and then the mechanisms for taking our products and services to market. Is this the right thing to be doing at this time? Who's going to be interested in these products? And taking our behavioural service offering, our mental health and wellbeing service offering, and our recent SEND offering to market. So that's almost like a product development sort of lens. The digital lens we've obviously talked at length about, but interestingly, that didn't include trust-wide responsibility for IT until probably 6 months into the post commencing. So my portfolio broadened at that point in time. The commercial aspect joined again probably another 6 months after that. So the performance aspects of what I look after is not only around systems and data flow and performance, but it's about understanding how do we know that we're doing a good job across our academies. So I've worked quite hard with colleagues to co-author trust standards and the curation of what we've referred to as a trust standards framework. And that means that 25 highly autonomous academies can actually now work and understand each other in a common way when it comes to data and information governance. And already I've probably talked about 3 very broad and diverse functions as though they are one of the same thing. But for me, that's because it is, one thing, and that is about having clear systems and processes, clear purpose, and being able to support the schools to be the best they can be. And that's kind of where I'm at now with the journey. Is about how do we ensure that we take that infrastructure and that strategy and that work that we've done thus far and share it even wider with other schools, academies, local authorities up and down the country.
And using that as a commercial and partnership type arm.
Absolutely.
No, very good, and forward thinking as well. So I think we've discussed a lot about your journey and kind of how you've got to where you are. I think what I want to cover just in the last couple of questions really is what does leadership mean to you, and what makes a good leader. So we'll just discuss a bit about leadership, if you don't mind.
So I think my view on leadership is about achieving that kind of shared ambition and understanding around a common purpose. And I referred earlier to sort of outdoor activities being a really good way to unite people, and through adversity and challenge, pushing people outside the comfort zone, whether that's climbing a mountain or going on a walk or
you climbed any mountains then?
I've done a few in my time, but the situation is sometimes there's no turning back. You've just got to persevere, and it ain't always nice, and it might be cold, it might be wet, and so you've got to look after yourself, but you've also got to look after the people that you're with, and everyone's needs are different. Everybody's prior experiences and journeys have been very different, and you've just got to kind of continuously nurture the relationships and build those relationships in order to achieve that common purpose. And so my view and philosophy around leadership is very much aligned with that vision and values that Wellspring as an organisation upholds, and that is about inclusion, making sure that everybody can play their part, and also about relationships matter, and relationships make a difference. And that means how do we move forward as a community, and that sense of community we talked about with rugby league and sports. I kind of feel at home in my current role, but also within the organisation, because it is about doing the right thing. It might not be in line with the latest, policy or regulatory sort of views and beliefs or political ideologies, but together, I think we can kind of move forward as a community. In the way that meets the needs of our young people and meets the needs of our workforce.
Yeah, makes sense.
So yeah, leadership is an interesting one. Early in my career, I saw leadership and management being about titles and roles and structures, and actually, one of the things that I've learned along the way is that you can still affect and influence irrespective of title, role, and structures. It may be harder to do, and it's often helped by structural hierarchies and things. But a lot of it, as you will know, comes down to networks, resources, and the ability to communicate. So leadership is about how do you get the best out of each person in that team in a way that is supportive of their needs, personal growth, and development aspirations.
Yeah, nicely put. Very nicely put. So how do you approach difficult conversations then?
Ideally, try to avoid them happening in the first place.
Of course.
But I think where they need to happen, I think people appreciate humility, and so with that, it's about being honest, open, and transparent with.
Have you ever had to sack anybody or let someone go?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had to do it once, and yeah, it was awful. It was not a nice experience, but I don't know if you'll resonate with me here, but it was so much worse in my head before than it actually was when I done it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, whether it is dismissal or whether it is difficult conversation or performance, I think that anybody, I always look at it through my own eyes. I think all anybody ever wants is clarity of purpose.
Yeah.
And so whenever you are providing clarity and whenever you are working with individuals or teams towards a common goal, and we are very clear with how those individuals contribute to that common goal, the conversations are very much then around are you achieving that aspiration or not? And where you're not achieving that aspiration, it's sometimes needed to be honest with yourself and with the team. And if you do it in that way, people don't take it personally. This is not about often it's not about an individual's personality or an individual as a person. It's often if you provide support, you provide the ongoing monitoring and evaluation of where you are on a particular thing, project, initiative. It shouldn't come as any surprise to anyone if things are not where they need to be.
Yeah.
I'm all for clear lines of accountability and responsibility, but I also understand the need for collective responsibility as well.
Yeah.
And so if people understand that from day one, then in any surprise if we start to have a conversation around things when they're not working. And we work in a time now where people are more open to different phases and chapters of their career journeys, and traditionally people would have got one job and stayed with it for eternity, and that's very different to now, because I remember watching a video, I think, when I was back at school, and it said, by the time you're 30, you will have had so many different jobs. That's true. That has happened, and I think that will continue to happen, and people will work in a more.
I before I started PNE, Partnership Network Events. So I left school at 16. I got put on early study leave. I then come back, had to do my exams in a room on my own because I was too disruptive to the group. And then I then worked for a plasterer for about 7-8 months. My brother worked for him, so it just was like, yeah, do you want to? My big brother got me a job basically, and then from there I got into sales. But the amount of times that I was sacked or left, like if you'd have saw my CV 4 years ago, I'd have been written off, by most, especially by big corporate employers. And so I think it's about having that ability to kind of, and it doesn't matter, if you get sacked from a job when you're young or you leave because it's not quite right for you. It's about trying many different things and basically working out what might be right for you. And then if you think something might be right, focus on that for a little bit, because you might be wrong and it might not be right. And the chances are that probably will be the case a couple of times until you fall into, and literally, most people will fall into or have fallen into the jobs that they then run with and really enjoy and go on to make a career out of. So, resonate with that, really do. So cool. Right. My last question. So a bit of a left field one, and it's basically just to try and put you on the spot a little bit and get your brain working. But don't worry, it's not going to be a hard maths equation. So I asked this at the end of every podcast. So, right, hypothetically speaking, you've now left your role as a CIO at Wellspring. You are now the chief executive officer of a global consumer products brand. And you've been brought on because you've got a real innovating product that can potentially change the world. But you're the CEO, and you've got to put your board together, and you've got to make your last 3 hires of your board. So you need a chief marketing officer, you need a chief information officer, and you need a chief commercial officer. Dead or alive, from history, celebrities, entrepreneurs, famous people, etc., or people you've worked with, however you want to play it. Who's your board? Who makes up your CIO, your CMO, and your CCO? Why those people? Who and why?
No, that definitely is. It definitely is one that I need to think about, because there's lots of fantastic people out there, and I think you could answer that with some of the real big hitters that have made prominence and had impact already. But I think I probably would go back to my earlier point about the names are irrelevant. I think that it's about getting the right people at that right time to ensure that the relationships are there, and that is probably a little bit of a get out rather than giving you some specific names. But I'd rather have a board that understood the product and the service, understood I guess the ambitions of that organization, and were there because they cared, as opposed to
you could tell you work in IT with such a logical answer.
Yeah, well, I think if you take it back to it's like the Elite 11 football squad question. You could draft in the top 11 players from
would they play well together, or
well together? Probably not. And so I think it would have to be people that could work collegiately, were there with that common purpose, and were prepared to support and challenge. So if you want me to come back to you with some specific names, I will do. But
no, I like your answer. It's not one that we've had so far, so this is brilliant. But look, Jonny, thank you so much for your time and and joining the podcast. It's been great to have you on, and it's been great to get to know the person behind the job title.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for having me, Joe. Speak soon. Bye.
Cheers, mate. Hi everybody, thanks so much for listening to that episode of the P&E podcast. If you like what you heard, please make sure that you share this episode via your social media channels, as it really does help us to gain traction in promoting this podcast series. Please make sure that you also subscribe to the channel that you're listening via, as you'll then get notifications as soon as we release our next podcast episode. Thank you.